Section 18 of The Natural History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Natural History, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley. Section 18, Book 3, Chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 8, the seventh region of Italy. Next to this comes the seventh region, in which is Etruria, a district which begins at the river Macra and has often changed its name. At an earlier period the Umbri were expelled from it by the Pelasgi, and these again by the Lydians, who from a king of theirs were named the Tyrrheni, but afterwards from the rites observed in their sacrifices were called in the Greek language Tusci. The first town in Etruria is Luna, with a noble harbor, then the colony of Lucca, at some distance from the sea, and nearer to it again the colony of Pisae, between the rivers Auser and the Arnus, which owes its origin to Pelops and the Pisians, or else to the Teutoni, a people of Greece. Next is Vada Volterrana, then the river Caecina, and Populonium, formerly belonging to the Etrurians, the only town they had on this coast. Next to these is the river Prile, then the Umbro, which is navigable, and where the district of Umbria begins, the port of Telamon, Cosa of the Volscientes, founded by the Roman people, Graviscae, Castrum Novum, Pyrgi, the river Caeretanus, and Caere itself, 4 miles inland, called Agylla by the Pelasgi who founded it, Alsium, Phrygae, and the river Tiber, 284 miles from the Macra. In the interior we have the colonies of Falisci, founded by the Argives, according to the account of Cato, and surnamed Falisci Etruscorum, Lucus Foroni, Russelana, the Cienses, and Sutrina. The remaining peoples are the Aretini, Veteres, the Aretini Fidentes, the Aretini Iulienses, and the Amitinenses, the Aquenses, surnamed Taurini, the Blerani, the Cortonenses, the Campanates, the Clusini Novae, the Clusini Veteres, the Florentini, situate on the stream of the Arnus, Faesulae, Ferentinum, Fescenia, Hortanum, Erbanum, Nepeta, Novum Pagi, the Claudian prefecture of Foroclodium, Pistorium, Perusia, the Swanenses, the Saturini, formerly called the Aurini, the Subertani, the Statones, the Tarquinenses, the Tuscanienses, the Vetulonienses, the Vientani, the Vientini, the Vesentini, the Volaterrani, the Vocentini, surnamed Etrusci, and the Volsinienses. In the same district the territories of Crustumerium and Calatra retain the names of the ancient towns. Chapter 9. The first region of Italy, the Tiber, Rome. The Tiber, or Tiberus, formerly called Thybris, and previously Arbula, flows down from nearly the central part of the chain of the Apennines in the territory of the Aretini. It is at first small and only navigable by means of sluices, in which the water is dammed up and then discharged in the same manner as the Timia and the Glanis, which flow into it. For which purpose it is found necessary to collect the water for 9 days, unless there should happen to be a fall of rain, and even then the Tiber, by reason of its rugged and uneven channel, is really more suitable for navigation by rafts than by vessels for any great distance. It winds along for a course of 150 miles, passing not far from Tifernum, Perusia, and Auriculum, and dividing Etruria from the Umbri and the Sabini, and then, at a distance of no less than 16 miles from the city, separating the territory of Veii from that of Crustunium, and afterwards that of the Finenates, and of Latium from Vaticanum. Below its union with the Glanes, from Aretinum, the Tiger is swollen by 2 and 40 streams, particularly the Nar, and the Anio, which last is also navigable and shuts in Latium at the back. It is also increased by the numerous aqueducts and springs which are conveyed to the city. Here it becomes navigable by vessels of any burden which may come up from the Italian Sea, a most tranquil dispenser of the produce of all parts of the earth, and peopled and embellished along its banks with more villas than nearly all the other rivers of the world taken together. And yet there is no river more circumscribed than it, so close are its banks shut in on either side. But still no resistance does it offer, although its waters frequently arise with great suddenness, and no part is more liable to be swollen than that which runs through the city itself. In such case, however, the Tiber is rather to be looked upon as pregnant with prophetic warnings to us, and in its increase to be considered as more a promoter of religion than a source of devastation. Latium has preserved its original limits, from the Tiber to Circeii, a distance of 50 miles, so slender at the beginning were the roots from which this our empire sprang. Its inhabitants have often changed, and different nations have peopled it at different times: the Aborigines, the Pelasgi, the Arcades, the Seculi, the Aroniki, the Rutuli, and beyond Circeii, the Volsci, the Osci, and the Ausones, whence the name of Latium came to be extended as far as the river Liris. We will begin with Ostia, a colony founded by a king of Rome, the town of Laurentium, the grove of Jupiter Indiges, the river Numicus, and Ardea, founded by Danae, the mother of Perseus. Next come the former site of Aphrodisium, the colony of Antium, the river and island called Astura, the river Nymphaeus, the Clusta Romana, and Circeii, formerly an island, and, if we are to believe Homer, surrounded by open sea, though now by an extensive plain. The circumstances which we are enabled to publish on this subject for the information of the world are very remarkable. Theophrastus, the first foreigner who treated of the affairs of Rome with any degree of accuracy, for Theopompus before, whose no time Greek writer had made any mention of us, only stated the fact that the city had been taken by the Gauls, and Clitarchus, the next after him, only spoke of the embassy which was sent by the Romans to Alexander. Theophrastus, I say, following something more than mere rumor, has given the circuit of the island of Circeii as being 80 stadia, in the volume which he wrote during the archonship of Nicodorus at Athens, being the 440th year of our city. Whatever land, therefore, has been annexed to that island beyond the circumference of about 10 miles has been added to Italy since the year previously mentioned. Another wonderful circumstance, too: near Circeii are the Pomptine marshes, formerly the site, according to Mucanius, who was thrice consul, of 24 cities. Next to this comes the river Ufens, upon which is the town of Terracina, called in the language of the Volsci Anzor, the spot too where Amyclae stood, a town destroyed by serpents. Next is the site of the grotto, Lake Fudanus, the port of Caieta, and then the town of Formiae, formerly called Hormiae, the ancient seat of the Laestrygones, it is supposed. Beyond this formerly stood the town of Pyrrhae, and we then come to the colony of Metorni, which still exists, and is divided by the river Liris, also called the Glanus. The town of Sinuessa is the last in the portion which has been added to Latium. It is said by some that it used to be called Sinope. At this spot begins the blessed country Campania, and in this vale first take their rise those hills clad with vines, the juice of whose grape is extolled by fame all over the world, the happy spot where, as the ancients used to say, Father Liber and Ceres are ever striving for the mastery. Hence the fields of Saetia and Caecubum extend afar, and next to those of Falernum and of Calinum. As soon as we have passed these, the hills of Mysiae, of Gaurus, and of the Sarentum rise to our view. Next the level plains of Laborium are spread out far and wide, where every care is bestowed on cultivating crops of spelt, from which the most delicious furmenty is made. These shores are watered by warm springs, while the seas are distinguished beyond all others for the superlative excellence of their shell and other fish. In no country, too, has the oil of the olive a more exquisite flavor. This territory, a battleground as it were for the gratification of every luxurious pleasure of man, has been held successively by the Osci, the Greeks, the Umbri, the Tusci, and the Campani. On the coast we first meet with the river Savo, the town of Volturnum, with the river of the same name, the town of Liternum, Cumae, a Chalcidian colony, Misenum, the port of Baiae, Bauli, the Lucrine lake, and Lake Avernus, near which there formerly stood a town of the Cimmerians. We then come to Puteoli, formerly called the colony of Dicaearchia, then the Philagrian plains, and the marsh of Acherusa in the vicinity of Cumae. Again on the coast we have Neapolis, also a colony of the Chalcidians, and called Parthenope, from the tomb there of one of the Sirens; Herculaneum, Pompeii, from which the Mount Vesuvius may be seen at no great distance, and which is watered by the river Sarnus; the territory of Nuceria, and at the distance of 9 miles from the sea, the town of that name; and then Sorrentum, with the promontory of Minerva, formerly the abode of the Sirens. This thence by sea to Cercaii is 78 miles. This region, beginning at the Tiber, is looked upon as the first of Italy, according to the division of Augustus. Inland there are the following colonies: Capua, so called from its champaign country; Aquinum, Suessa, Venafrum, Sora, Teanum, surnamed Sidicinum, Nola, and the towns of Arbela, Aricia, Alba Longa, the Acarani, the Alefani, the Altinates, the Aletrinates, the Anagnini, the Atellani, the Afilani, the Arpinates, the Auxumates, the Abelani, the Alfaterni, both of those who took their names from the Latin, the Hyrcanian, and the Labicanian territory; Boviae, Calatia, Casinum, Calenum, Capitulunum of the Hercini, and the Cercatini, surnamed Mariani, the Corcani, the Corani, descended from the Trojan Dardanus, the Cuboterni, the Castrimonienses, Cingulani, the Fabenses on the Alban Mount, and the Foropoplienses of the Falernian district, the Frusinates, the Ferentinates, the Fregiantes, the old Frabaterni, the new Frabaterni, the Ficolenses, the Frigilani, Forum Appii, the Ferentani, the Gabini, the Interamnate Sucasni, also surnamed Lerinates, the Uionenses Lavinii, the Norbani, the Nomentani, the Praenestini, whose city was formerly called Stephani, the Prevenates, the Saetini, the Signini, the Suessalani, the Telesini, the Trebulani, surnamed Balienses, the Trebani, the Tusculani, the Verulani, the Veletriani, the Ulubrenses, the Urbinates, and last, and greater than all, Rome herself, whose other name the hallowed mysteries of the sacred rites forbid us to mention without being guilty of the greatest impiety. After it had been long kept buried in secrecy by the strictest fidelity and in respectful and salutary silence, Valerius Soranus dared to divulge it, but soon did he pay the penalty of his rashness. It will not perhaps be altogether foreign to the purpose if I here make mention of one peculiar institution of our forefathers which bears especial reference to the inculcation of silence on religious matters. The goddess Angerona, to whom sacrifice is offered on the 12th day before the calends of January, 21st of December, is represented in having her mouth bound by a sealed fillet. Romulus left the city of Rome, if we are to believe those who state the very greatest number having 3 gates and no more. When the Vespasians were emperors and censors in the year from its beginning, 826, the circumference of the walls which surrounded it was 13 miles and 2/5. Surrounding as it does the 7 hills, the city is divided into 14 districts, with 265 crossroads under the guardianship of the Lares. If a straight line is drawn from the mile column placed at the entrance of the forum to each of the gates, which are at present 37 in number, taking care to count only once the 12 double gates and to admit the 7 old ones which no longer exist, the result will be, taking them all together, a straight line of 20 miles and 765 paces. But if we draw a straight line from the same mile column to the very last of the houses, including therein the praetorian encampment, and follow throughout the line of all the streets, the result then will be something more than 70 miles. Add to these calculations the height of the houses, and then a person may form a fair idea of this city, and will certainly be obliged to admit that there is not a place throughout the whole world that for size can compare to it. On the eastern side it is bounded by the Agger of Tarquinius Superbus, a work of surpassing grandeur, for he raised it so high as to be on a level with the walls on the side on which the city lay most exposed to the attack from the neighboring plains. On all the other sides it had been fortified either with lofty walls or steep and precipitous hills, but so it is that its buildings, increasing and extending beyond all bounds, have now united many other cities to it. Besides those previously mentioned, there were formerly in the first region the following famous towns of Latium: Satricum, Pomatia, Scaptia, Polotorium, Tilene, Tifata, Caenina, Ficana, Crustumerium, Ameriola, Medulum, Corniculum, Saturnia, on the site of the present city of Rome, Antipolus, now Janiculum, forming part of Rome, Antemnae, Camerium, Calatia, Amitinum, Norbe, Sulmo, and with these those Alban nations who used to take part in the sacrifices upon the Alban Mount, the Albani, the Isulani, the Achienses, the Abolani, the Bubitani, the Bolani, the Husuetani, the Coriolani, the Fidentes, the Fidenates, the Foretii, the Hortenses, the Latinenses, the Longulani, the Manates, the Mairales, the Mutucomenses, the Munienses, the Numinienses, the Oliculani, the Actulani, the Pedani, the Puluskini, the Querquatulani, the Sicani, the Sisolenses, the Tolerienses, the Tutienses, the Vimitilarii, the Velienses, the Venetulani, and the Vitilenses. Thus we see 53 people of ancient Latium have passed away without leaving any traces of their existence. In the Campanian territory there was also the town of Stabiae, until the consulship of Cnaeus Pompeius and Lucius Cato, when, on the day before the calends of May (April 30th), it was destroyed in the social war by Lucius Sulla, the legatus, and all that now stands on its site is a single farmhouse. Here also Tyrrhenia has ceased to exist, and the remains of Casilinum are fast going to ruin. Besides these, we learn from Antius that King Lucius Tarquinius took Appioli, a town of the Latins, and with its spoils laid the first foundations of the capital. From Surrentum to the river Salarus, the former territory of Picentia extends for a distance of 30 miles. This belonged to the Etruscans, and was remarkable for the temple of the Argive Juno, founded by Jason. It was in Picentia, a town of the territory of Salernum. End of section 18. Section 19 of the Natural History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Natural History, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley. Section 19. Book 3, Chapters 10 through 14. The third region of Italy. 64 islands, among which are the Baleares, Corsica, Sardinia, Sicily. Chapter 10. The third region of Italy. At the Salaris begins the third region of Italy, consisting of the territory of Lucania and Bruttium. Here, too, there have been no few changes of the population. These districts have been possessed by the Pelasgi, the Oenotrii, the Italii, the Morgetes, the Siculi, and more especially by the people who emigrated from Greece, and, last of all, by the Leucani, a people sprung from the Samnites, who took possession under the command of Lucius. We find here the town of Paestum, which received from the Greeks the name of Posidonia, the Gulf of Paestum, the town of Aelia, now known as Walia, and the promontory of Palinarium, a point at which the land falls inward and forms a bay, the distance across which to the pillar of Rhegium is 100 miles. Next, after Palinarium, comes the river Melpes, then the town of Buxentum, called in Magna Graecia Paixus, and the river Laus. There was formerly a town also of the same name. At this spot begins the coast of Bruttium, and we come to the town of Blanda, the river Batum, Parthenius, a port of the Phocians, the bay of Vibo, place where Clampatia formerly stood, the town of Tamsa, called Temesi by the Greeks, and Terina, founded by the people of Crotona, with the extensive Gulf of Terina. More inland, the town of Consentia. Situate upon a peninsula is the river Acheron, from which the people of Acherontia derive the name of their town. Then Hippo, now called Vibo Valentia, the port of Hercules, the river Mataros, the town of Taronentum, the port of Orestes, and Medma. Next, the town of Scylaeum, the river Crates, the mother of Scylla, it is said. Then the pillar of Rhegium, the straits of Sicily, and the two promontories which face each other, Caenis on the Italian and Pelorus on the Sicilian side, the distance between them being 12 stadia. At a distance thence of 12½ miles we come to Rhegium, after which begins Scylla, a forest of the Apennines, and then the promontory of Leucipetra, at a distance of 15 miles, after which come the Locri, who take their surname from the promontory of Zephyrium, being distant from the river Salaris 303 miles. At this spot ends the first great gulf of Europe, the seas in which bear the following names. That from which it takes its rise is called the Atlantic, by some the Great Atlantic, the entrance of which by the Greeks is called Porthmos, by us the Strait of Gades. After its entrance, as far as it washes the coast of Spain, it is called the Hispanian Sea, though some give it the name of the Iberian or Balearic Sea. Where it faces the province of Gallic Narbonensis, it has the name of the Gallic, and after that of the Ligurian Sea. From Liguria to the island of Sicily, it is called the Tuscan Sea, the same which it is called by the Greeks, the Notian, by others the Tyrrhenian, while many of our people call it the Lower Sea. Beyond Sicily, as far as the country of the Salentini, it is styled by Polybius the Ausonian Sea. Eratosthenes, however, gives to the whole expanse that lies between the inlet of the ocean and the island of Sardinia the name of the Sardoan Sea, thence to Sicily the Tyrrhenian, thence to Crete the Sicilian, and beyond that island the Cretan Sea. Chapter 11. 64 islands, among which are the Baleares. The first islands that we meet in those seas are the two which the Greeks have given the name of Pitusai, from the pine trees which they produce. These islands now bear the name of Ebusus, and form a federate state. They are separated by a narrow strait of the sea, and are 46 miles in extent. They are the distance from Dianum, 700 stadia, Diana by land being the same distance from New Carthage. At the same distance from the Pitiusai lie in the open sea the two Baleares, and over against the river Sucro, Colubraria. The Baleares, so formidable in war with their slingers, have received from the Greeks the name of Gymnazai. The larger island is 100 miles in length and 475 in circumference. It has the following towns: Palma and Pollentia, enjoying the rights of Roman citizens; Cinium and Tucis, with Latin rights. Bocorum, a federate town, is no longer in existence. At 30 miles distance is the smaller island, 40 miles in length and 150 in circumference. It contains the states of Hamnon, Sanicera, and Magon. In the open sea, at 12 miles distance from the larger island, is Capraria, with its treacherous coast, so notorious for its numerous shipwrecks, and opposite to the city of Palma are the islands known as the Minarii, Tiquadra, and the little Anibalas. The earth of Ebusus has the effect of driving away serpents, while that of Calabraria produces them. Hence the latter spot is dangerous to all persons who have not brought with them some of the earth of Ebusus. The Greeks have given it the name of Ophiusa. Ebusus, too, produces no rabbits to destroy the harvests of the Balares. There are also about 20 other small islands in this sea, which are full of shoals. Off the coast of Gaul, at the mouth of the Rhodanus, there is Metina, and near it the island which is known as Blascon, with the 3 Stoicades, so called by their neighbours the Massilians on account of the regular order in which they are placed. Their respective names are Prote, Mese, also called Pomponiana, and Hypatia. After these come Strurium, Phoenice, Phila, Lero, and opposite to Antipolis, Lerina, where there is a resemblance of a town called Vogionum having once existed. Chapter 12. Corsica. In the Ligurian Sea, but close to the Tuscan, is Corsica, by the Greeks called Kyrnos, extending from north to south 150 miles, and for the most part 50 miles in breadth, its circumference being 325. It is 62 miles distant from the Vada Volaterna. It contains 32 states and 2 colonies, that of Mariana, founded by Gaius Marius, and that of Aleria, founded by the dictator Sylla. On this side of it is Oglassa, and at a distance of less than 60 miles from Corsica, Planaria, so called from its appearance being so nearly level with the sea, and consequently dangerous to mariners. We next have Urgo, a larger island, and Capraria, which the Greeks have called Aiglion, then Igilium and Dianium, which they have also called Artemisia, both of them opposite the coast of Cosa, also Barpana, Minaria, Columbaria, and Venaria. We then come to Ilva, with its iron mines, an island 100 miles in circumference, 10 miles distant from Populonum, and also called Ithalia by the Greeks. From it the island of Planasia is distant 28 miles. After these, beyond the mouth of the Tiber, and off the coast of Antium, we come to Astora, then Palmaria, and Sinonia, and opposite to Formiae, Pontii. In the Gulf of Puteoli are Pandatiera and Phocaita, so called not from the nurse of Aeneas, but because it has been poured forth or detached from Inaria, an island which received its name from having been the anchorage of the fleet of Aeneas, though called by Homer Inarimi. It is also called Pithecusa, not, as many have fancied, on account of the multitudes of apes found there, but from its extensive manufactures of pottery. Between Paulicippum and Neapolis lies the island of Megaris, and then at a distance of 8 miles from Sorrentum, Caprii, famous for the castle of the Emperor Tiberius. It is 11 miles in circumference. Chapter 13. Sardinia. Leucothea comes next, and after it, but out of sight, as it lies upon the verge of the African Sea, Sardinia. It is situate somewhat less than 8 miles from the nearest point of Corsica, and the straits between them are even still more reduced by the small islands there situate, called the Cunicalii, as also those of Fintonus and Phocae, from which last the straits themselves have obtained the name of Tafros. Sardinia extends upon the east side a distance of 188 miles, on the west 175, on the south 77, and on the north 125, being 565 miles in circumference. Its promontory of Caralis is distant from Africa 200, and from Gades 1,400 miles. Off the promontory of Gordus it has two islands, called the Isles of Hercules, off that of Sucus, the island of Aeneas, and off that of Caralis, Vicaria. Some writers place Belarus not far from it, as also Caludus, and the islands known as Harris Lutra. The most celebrated peoples of this island are the Ilienses, the Balare, and the Corsi, and among its 18 towns there are those of the Socatani, the Valentii, the Valentini, the Neapolitani, the Bonsenes, the Caralatani, who enjoy the rights of Roman citizens, and the Nornenses. There is also one colony which is called Ad Turam Libinsonis. Timaeus has called this island Sandaliotus on account of its similarity of its shape to the sole of a shoe, while Myrtilus has given it the name of Ignusa from its resemblance to the print of a footstep. Opposite to the Gulf of Paestum is Leucasia, so called from a siren who is buried there. Opposite to Walia are Pontia and Isakia, both known by one name, that of the Eodentrides, a proof that Italy was formerly possessed by the Eotronians. Opposite to Vibo are the little islands called Ithacesiae, from the watchtower of Ulysses, situate there. Chapter 14. Sicily. But more celebrated than all is Sicily, called Sicania by Thucydides, and by many writers Trinacria, or Trinachia, from its triangular appearance. According to Agrippa, it is 618 miles in circumference. In former times it was the continuation of the territory of Bruttium, but in consequence of the overflowing of the sea became severed from it, thus forming a strait of 15 miles in length and a mile and a half in width, in the vicinity of the pillar of Rhegium. It was from this circumstance of the land being severed asunder that the Greeks gave the name of Rhegium to the town situate on the Italian shore. In these straits is the rock of Scylla, as also Charybdis, a whirlpool of the sea, both of them noted for their perils. Of this triangle, the promontory, which, as we have already mentioned, is called Pelorus, faces Scylla and juts out towards Italy, while Pacunum extends in the direction of Greece, Peloponnesus being at the distance of it of 440 miles, and Lilybaeum towards Africa, being distant 180 miles from the promontory of Mercury, and from that of Caralis in Sardinia 190. These promontories and sides are situate at the following distances from each other. By land it is 186 miles from Pelorus to Pacunum, from Pacunum to Lilybaeum 200, from Lilybaeum to Pelorus 170. On this island there are 5 colonies and 63 cities or states. Leaving Pelorus and facing the Ionian Sea, we have the town of Messana, whose inhabitants are also called Mamertini and enjoy the rights of Roman citizens. The promontory of Drepanum, the colony of Tauromenium, formerly called Naxos, the river Asines, and Mount Etna, wondrous for the flames which it emits by night. Its crater is 20 stadia in circumference, and from it red-hot cinders are thrown as far as Tauromenium and Catina, the noise being heard even at Maroneum and the Gemelian hills. We then come to the 3 rocks of the Cyclops, the port of Ulysses, the colony of Catina, and the rivers Samythus and Tereus, while more inland lie the Laestrygonian plains. To these rivers succeed the towns of Leotinum and Megaris, the river Pantigaes, the colony of Syracuse, with the fountain of Arethusa. The people in the Syracusan territory drink too from the fountains of Tementis, Archidemia, Magi, Chiane, and Milicae. The port of Neustathmus, the river Alorus, and the promontory of Pacinum. This side of Sicily begins with the river Herminius, then follows the town of Camarina, the river Gellas, and the town of Agrigas, which our people have named Agrigentum. We next come to the colony of Thermae, the rivers Achates, Mazara, and Hypsa, the town of Salinus, and then the promontory of Lilybaeum, which is succeeded by Deprana, Mount Eryx, the towns of Panhormus, Solus, and Himera, with the river of the same name, Cephaloides, Aluntium, Agathrinum, the colony of Tyndarus, the town of Mylae, and then Pelorus, the spot at which we begin. In the interior there are the following towns enjoying Latin privileges: those of the Centurpini, the Netini, and the Segestani. Tributary towns are those of the Assorini, the Aetnenses, the Agrini, the Acestai, the Acrenses, the Bidini, the Cetarini, the Cacarini, the Drepanatani, the Eregetini, the Estrienses, the Ericini, the Antilini, the Aenini, the Aeguini, the Galani, the Galatini, the Halesini, the Henenses, the Hyblenses, the Erbetenses, the Erbensenses, the Erbulenses, the Halianenses, the Hadritani, the Macrienses, the Ipaneses, the Ictenses, the Maitistritini, the Maglini, the Morgantini, the Muticenses, the Menanini, the Naxii, the Noae, the Petrini, the Paropini, the Fithienses, the Semelatini, the Scherini, the Salinuntii, the Simaithii, the Talarienses, the Ticinenses, the Triocalini, the Tiricanenses, and the Zanclai, a Messenian colony on the Straits of Sicily. Towards Africa, its islands are Gaulos, Melita, 87 miles from Camarina and 113 from Lilybaeum, Kosira, Hieronensos, Kaine, Galata, Lopadusa, Aethusa, written by some Igusa, Bucina, Osteodes, distant from Saluntium 75 miles, and opposite to Peropus, Ustica. On this side of Sicily, facing the river Meterus, at a distance of nearly 25 miles from Italy, are the 7 islands called the Aeolian, also called the Liparian Islands. By Greeks they are called the Hephastiades, and by our writers the Vulcanian Islands. They are called Aeolian because in Trojan times Iolaus was king there. Lipara, with the town whose inhabitants enjoy the rights of Roman citizens, is so called from Liparus, a former king who succeeded Iolus, it having been previously called Megalonsis or Megalunsis. It is 25 miles distant from Italy, and in circumference a little less. Between this island and Sicily we find another, the name of which was formerly Thracia, but now called Hiera, because it was sacred to Vulcan. It contains a hill which at night vomits forth flames. The third island is Strongyli, lying 1 mile to the east of Lipara, over which Iolaus reigned as well. It differs only from Lipara in the superior brilliancy of its flames. From the smoke of this volcano, it is said by some of the inhabitants are able to predict 3 days beforehand what winds are about to blow. Hence arose the notion that the winds are governed by Iolaus. The fourth of these islands is Didyme, smaller than Lipara, the fifth Erecusa, the sixth Phoenusca, left to be a pasture ground for the cattle of the neighboring islands, and the last and smallest Eonymos. Thus much as to the first great gulf of Europe. End of section 19. Section 20 of the Natural History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Natural History, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley. Section 19. Books 3, Chapters 15 through 17, Magna Graecia, beginning at Locri, the second region of Italy, the fourth region of Italy. Chapter 15, Magna Graecia, beginning at Locri. At Locri begins the forepart of Italy, called Magna Graecia, whose coast falls back in 3 bays formed by the Ausonian Sea, so called from the Ausones, who were the first inhabitants of the country. According to Varro, it is 86 miles in extent, but most writers have made it only 75. Along this coast there are rivers innumerable, but we shall mention only those that are worthy of remark. After leaving Locri, we come to the Sagra, and the ruins of the town of Caulon, Mistii, Consilinum, Castrum, Cocanthum, in the opinion of some, the longest headland of Italy, and then the Gulf of Scylacium, and Scylacium itself, which was called by the Athenians, when they founded it, Sciletium. This part of Italy is nearly a peninsula, in consequence of the Gulf of Terrenium running up into it on the other side. In it there is the harbour called Castra Annibalis, and no other part is Italy narrower than here, it being but 20 miles across. For this reason the elder Dionysius entertained the idea of severing this portion from the mainland of Italy at this spot and adding it to Sicily. The navigable rivers in this district are the Carcines, the Crotalus, the Samarus, the Arocas, and the Targines. In the interior is the town of Paetilia, and there are, besides, Mount Clibanus, the promontory of Licinium, in front of which lies the island of Dioscuri, 10 miles from the mainland, and another called the Isle of Calypso, which Homer is supposed to refer to under the name of Ogaiga, as also the islands of Tyrus, Aranusa, and Meloesa. According to Agrippa, the promontory of Licinium is 70 miles from Caulon. At the promontory of Licinium begins the second Gulf of Europe, the bend of which forms an arc of great depth, and terminates at Acrocereunium, a promontory of Epirus, from which it is distant 75 miles. We first come to the town of Croton, and then the river Neathus, and the town of Thurii, situate between 2 rivers, Crathus and Sybaris, upon the latter of which there was once a city of the same name. In a similar manner, Heraclea, sometimes called Cyrus, lies between the river of that name and the Acheris. We next come to the rivers Acalandrus and Casuentum, and the town of Metapontum, with which the third region of Italy terminates. In the interior of Bruttium, the Aprustani are the only people, but in Lucania we find the Atanates, the Bantini, the Eburini, the Grumentini, the Pontentini, the Sontini, the Sirini, the Tergillani, the Ursentini, and the Vocantani, whom the Numenstrani join. Besides these, we learn from Cato that Thebes in Lucania has disappeared, and Theopompus informs us that there was formerly a city of the Lucani called Pandosia, at which Alexander, the king of Epirus, died. Chapter 16. The second region of Italy. Adjoining to this district is the second region of Italy, which embraces the Hirpini, Calabria, Apulia, and the Salentini, extending a distance of 250 miles along the Gulf of Tarentum, which receives its name from the town of the Laconians, so called, situate at the bottom of the Gulf, to which was annexed the maritime colony which had previously settled there. Tarentum is distant from the promontory of Licinium 136 miles, and throws out the territory of Calabria opposite to it in the form of a peninsula. The Greeks called this territory Messapia, from their leader, before which it was called Peucatia, from Peucatius, the brother of Oenotrius, and was comprised in the territory of Salentinum. Between the two promontories there is a distance of 100 miles. The breadth across the peninsula from Tarentum to Brundisium by land is 35 miles, considerably less if measured from the port of Sassina. The towns inland from Tarentum are Varia, surnamed Apulia, Messapia, and Aletium. On the coast, Senum and Callipolis, now known as Anza, 75 miles from Tarentum. Thence, at a distance of 32 miles, is the promontory of Acra Iapigia, at which point Italy projects the greatest distance into the sea. At a distance of 19 miles from this point is the town of Basta, and then Hydruntum, the spot at which the Ionian is separated from the Adriatic Sea, and from which the distance across to Greece is the shortest. The town of the Apollinates lies opposite to it, and the breadth of the arm of the sea which runs between is not more than 50 miles. Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, was the first to entertain the notion of uniting these two points, and making a passage on foot by throwing a bridge across. And after him, Marcus Varro, when commanding the fleet of Pompey in the war against the pirates. Other cares, however, prevented either of them from accomplishing this design. Passing Hydruntum, we come to the deserted site of Soletum, then Fraturatorum, the Portus Terentius, the haven of Miltopa, Lupia, Balasium, Caelia, and then Brundisium, 50 miles from Hydruntum. This last place is one of the most famous ports of Italy, and although more distant, affords by far the safest passage across to Greece, the place of disembarkation being Dyrrachium, a city of Illyria. The distance across is 225 miles. Adjoining Brundisium is the territory of the Pediculi. 9 youths and as many maidens, natives of Illyria, became the parents of 16 nations. The towns of the Pediculi are Rudii, Ignatia, and Barium. Their rivers are the Iapex, so called from the son of Daedalus, who was king there, and who gave it the name of Iapagia, the Pactius, and the Alphidius, which rises from the Hirpinian mountains and flows past Canusium. At this point begins Apulia, surnamed the Daunian, from the Daunii, who take their name from a former chief, the father-in-law of Diomedes. In this territory are the towns of Salapia, famous for Hannibal's amour with the courtesan, Simpontum, Aurea, the river Kerbalus, forming the boundary of the Daunii, the port of Agasus, and the promontory of Mount Garganus, distant from the promontory of Salentinium, or Iapagia, 234 miles. Making the circuit of Garganus, we come to the port of Garna, the lake Pantanus, the river Frento, the mouth of which forms a harbor, Tianum of the Apuli, and Larinum, Cliternia, and the river Tifernus, at which the district of the Frentani begins. Thus were there 3 different nations of the Apulians, the Daunii, the Tiani, so called from their leader, who sprang from the Greeks, and the Lucani, who were subdued by Calchas, and whose country is now possessed by the Atinates. Besides those already mentioned, there are, of the Daunii, the colonies of Lucaria and Venusia, the towns of Canusium and Arpi, formerly called Argos Hippium, and founded by Diomedes, afterwards called Agrippia. Here too Diomedes destroyed the nations of the Monadi and the Dardi, and the 2 cities of Apina and Trica, whose names have passed into a byword and a proverb. Besides the above, there is in the interior of the second region 1 colony of the Epirni, Beneventum, so called by an exchange of a more auspicious name for its old one of Maleventum. Also the Aeluani, the Aquilonii, the Abelanates, surnamed Protopi, the Campsani, the Caunii, the Liguriis, both those called the Corneliani and the Bebiani, the Vescalani, the Aeliani, the Alaterni, the Abelantes, surnamed Marsi, the Atrani, the Aiani, the Alphelani, the Atinates, the Arpani, the Borcani, the Colatini, the Corlenenses, the Canenses, rendered famous by the defeat of the Romans, the Dirini, the Forentani, the the Geuncini, the Herdunienses, the Irini, the Laurentes, surnamed Frentani, the Marinates of Gerganus, the Matolani, the Netini, the Robustini, the Silvini, the Strappellini, the Termentini, the Vibantes, the Veuncini, and the Urlutini. In the interior of Calabria there are the Agentini, the Apamestini, the Argentini, the Butuntinenses, the Deciani, the Grumbistiani, the Norbanenses, the Palionenses, the Sturtini, and the Turtini. There are also the following Salentine nations: the Alentini, the Basturbini, the Neretini, the Uzentini, and the Warentini. Chapter 17. The fourth region of Italy. We now come to the fourth region, which includes the most valiant, probably, of all the nations of Italy. Upon the coast, in the territory of the Frentani, after the river Tifernus, we find the river Trinium, with a good harbour at its mouth, the towns of Istonium, Bucca, and Ortona, and the river Aternus. In the interior are the Anaxi, surnamed Frentani, the higher and the lower Carentini, and the Lanunces. In the territory of the Marrucini, the Teatini, in that of the Pelagini, the Corfinenses, the Superaquani, and the Somonenses. In that of the Marsi, the Axantini, the Atenantes, the Fucentes, the Lucenses, and the Marovini. In that of the Albenses, the town of Alba on Lake Fucinus. In that of the Equiculiani, the Clintirni, and the Carciolani. In that of the Vestini, the Aguilani, the Pinenses, and the Peltuinantes, adjoining to whom are the Alfinantes Kismontani. In that of the Samnites, who have been called Sabelli, and whom the Greeks have called Saonitae, the colony of old Bovianum. In that of the Uducimiani, the Alfidiantes, the Esserini, the Fagufulani, the Ficolenses, the Saipinates, and the Teraventinates. In that of the Sabini, the Amartini, the Carenses, Forum Deci, Forum Novum, the Finentes, the Iteramantes, the Nursini, the Nomantini, the Reatini, the Trebulani, both those called Mutesci and those called Sufentes, the Tribirtes, and the Tarinates. In these districts the Comini, the Tadiates, the Caedici, and the Alfertini, tribes of the Equiculi, have disappeared. From Gallianus we learn that Archippe, a town of the Marsi, built by Marcius, a chieftain of the Lydians, has been swallowed up by the lake Fucinus, and Valerianus informs us that the town of the Witicini in Picenum was destroyed by the Romans. The Sabini, so called according to some writers from their attention to religious observances and the worship of the god Servini, dwell on the dew-clad hills in the vicinity of the lakes of Velinus. The Nar, with its sulphureous waters, exhausts these lakes, and descending from Mount Ficalus, unites with them near the groves of Wacuna and Riate, and then directs its course towards the Tiber, in which it discharges itself. Again, in another direction, the Anio, taking its rise in the mountains of the Trabani, carries into the Tiber the waters of three lakes, remarkable for their picturesque beauty, and to which Subalaquium is indebted for its name. In the territory of Riate is the lake of Cutilae, in which there is a floating island, and which, according to Marcus Varro, is the navel or central point of Italy. Below the Sabine territory lies that of Latium, on one side Picenum, and behind it Umbria, while the range of the Apennines flanks it on either side. End of section 20. Section 21 of The Natural History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Natural History, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley. Section 21, Book 3, Chapters 18 through 22. The fifth region of Italy, the sixth region of Italy, the eighth region of Italy, the Padus, the 11th region of Italy, Italia Transpadana, the 10th region of Italy. Chapter 18. The fifth region of Italy. The fifth region is that of Picenum, once remarkable for the denseness of its population. 360,000 Picentines took the oaths of fidelity to the Roman people. They are descended from the Sabines, who had made a vow to celebrate a holy spring. Their territory commenced at the river Aternus, where the present district and colony of Adria is at a distance of 6 miles from the sea. Here we find the river Vomanus, the territories of Praetutia and Palma, Castrum Novum, the river Batinus, Truentum, with its river of the same name, which place is the only remnant of the Liburni in Italy, the river Abula, Tervinum, at which the Praetutian district ends, and that of Picenum begins, the town of Cupra, Castellum, Fermanorum, and above it the colony of Asculum, the most illustrious in Picenum. In the interior there is the town of Novana. Upon the coast we have Cluana, Potentia, Numana, founded by the Siculi, and Ancona, a colony founded by the same people on the promontory of Cumarus, forming an elbow of the coast, where it begins to bend inwards, and distance from Gergonus 183 miles. In the interior are the Auxamates, the Berigrani, the Cingulani, the Cuprenses, surnamed Montani, the Falerenses, the Pausalani, Planinenses, the Ricinenses, the Septemdiani, the Tolatanates, the Traienses, and the Polatini of Urbs Salvia. Chapter 19. The sixth region of Italy. Adjoining to this is the sixth region, which includes Umbria and the Gallic territory in the vicinity of Ariminum. At Ancona begins the coast of that part of Gaul known as Gallia Togata. The Siculi and the Liburni possessed the greater part of this territory, and more particularly the territories of Palma, of Praetutia, and Adria. These were expelled by the Umbri, these again by the Etrurians, and those in turn by the Gauls. The Umbri are thought to have been the most ancient race in Italy, it being supposed that they were called Umbrii by the Greeks, from the fact of their having survived the rains which had inundated the earth. We read that 300 of their towns were conquered by the Tusci. At the present day, we find on their coast the river Isis, Senogalia, the river Metatrus, the colonies of Fanum Fortunae and Pisarum, with a river of the same name, and in the interior those of the Isbellum and Tuder. Besides the above, there are the Amerini, the Adidates, the Asinates, the Arnates, the Icinates, the Camarates, the Carsulintiani, the Carsulani, the Dolates, surnamed Salentini, the Foginiates, the Floroflaminenses, the Forojulienses, surnamed Concupienses, the Forobrentani, the Forosempronienses, the Iguvini, the Interamnantes, surnamed the Nartes, the Mevanates, the Mevionenses, the Matalienses, the Narninenses, whose town used formerly to be called Nequinum, the Nucerini, both those surnamed Favonienses and those called Camellani, the Ocriculani, the Ostranini, the Pitulani, both those surnamed Puserates, and the others called Mergentini, the Plestini, the Sentinantes, the Sarcinantes, the Spoletini, the Suasini, the Sestinates, the Suliates, the Tadinates, the Trebiates, the Tufecini, the Tifrenates, surnamed Tiberini, and the others called Metuapurenses, the Vesicantes, and the Urbanates, both these surnamed Meturances, and the others called Hortenses, the Veterances, the Vidiatanes, and the Viventani. In this district there exists no longer the Feliginates, who possess Clusiolum above Iteramna, and the Serenates with their towns of Acharai, surnamed Vapharai, and Torocalum, also called Vetiolum, as also the Solinates, the Curinates, the Phalianates, and the Apinates. The Arianates have also disappeared with the town of Crinovolum, as well as the Usidicani, the Plagianeses, the Paisanates, and the Caelestini. Cato writes that Ameria, above mentioned, was founded 964 years before the war with Perseus. Chapter 20. The eighth region of Italy, the Padus. The eighth region is bounded by Ariminum, the Padus, and the Apennines. Upon the coast we have the river Crustumium and the colony of Ariminum, with the rivers Ariminus and Aprusa. Next comes the river Rubico, once the boundary of Italy, and after it the Sapis, the Witis, and the Anemo, and then Ravenna, a town of the Sabines, with the river Bedacis, 105 miles from Ancona, and not far from the sea. Butrium, a town of the Umbri. In the interior there are the colonies of Bononia, formerly called Falsina, when it was the chief place of the Etruria, Brixellum, Mutina, Parma, and Placentia. There are also the towns of Caesena, Clasterna, Forum Clodi, Florum Livi, Forum Populi, Forum Truitanorum, Forum Cornile, Forum Licini, the Faviganti, the Fiditini, the Ostini, the Padanates, the Reginenses, who take their name from Lepidus, the Solotanis, the Saltus Gallini, surnamed Aquitanes, the Tanetani, the Veliates, who were anciently surnamed Regiates, and the Urbinates. In this district the Boii have disappeared, of whom there were 112 tribes according to Cato, and also the Senones, who captured Rome. The Padus descends from the bosom of Mount Vesulus, one of the most elevated points of the chain of the Alps, in the territories of the Ligurian Vaghiani, and rises at its source in a manner that well merits an inspection by the curious, after which it hides itself in a subterranean channel, until it rises again in the territory of the Forovibienses. It is inferior in fame to none whatever among the rivers, being known to the Greeks as the Eridanus, and famous as the scene of the punishment of Phaeton. At the rising of the Dog Star it is swollen by melted snows, but though it proves more furious in its course to the adjoining fields than to the vessels that are upon it, still it takes care to carry away no portion of its banks. When it recedes, renders them additionally fertile. Its length from its source is 300 miles, to which we must add 88 for its sinuosities, and it receives from the Apennines and Alps not only several navigable rivers, but immense lakes as well, which discharge themselves into its waters, thus conveying altogether as many as 30 streams into the Adriatic Sea. Among these, the best known are the following, flowing from the range of the Apennines: the Iactus, the Tanaras, the Trebia, which passes Placentia, the Taurus, the Inkia, the Gabelus, the Scoltena, and the Rhenus. From the chain of the Alps, the Strura, the Orgus, the two Durii, the Sesites, the Ticinus, the Lambrus, the Adua, the Oleus, and the Mincius. There is no river known to receive a larger increase than this in so short a space, so much indeed that it is impelled onwards by this vast body of water, and invading the land forms deep channels in its course. Hence it is that, although a portion of its stream is drawn off by waters and canals between Ravenna and Altinum for a space of 120 miles, still, at the spot where it discharges the vast body of its waters, it is said to form 7 seas. By the Augustan Canal the Padus is carried to Ravenna, at which place it is called the Padusa, having formerly borne the name of Missanicus. The nearest mouth to this spot forms the extensive port known as that of Atrenus, where Claudius Caesar, on his triumph over the Britons, entered the Adriatic in a vessel that deserved rather the name of a vast palace than a ship. This mouth, which was formerly called by some the Eridanian, has been by others styled the Spenectic mouth, from the city of Spina, a very powerful place which formerly stood in the vicinity. If we may form a conclusion from the amount of its treasure deposited at Delphi, it was founded by Diomedes. At this spot the river Watrenus, which flows from the territory of Forum Cornelii, swells the waters of the Padus. The next mouth is that of Carpasia, then that of Sagis, and then Volane, formerly called Olane. All these are situate upon the Flavian Canal, which the Tuscans formerly made from Sagis, thus drawing the impetuous stream of the river across into the marshes of the Atriani, which they call the Seven Seas, and upon which is the noble port of Atria, a city of the Tuscans, from which place the sea was formerly called the Adriatic, though now the Adriatic. We next come to the overflowing mouths of Carbonaria, and the Phocis of Philistina, by some called the Tartarus, all of which originate in the overflow of the waters in the Philistian canal, swollen by the streams of the Atasis, descending from the Tridentine Alps, and that of the Togenosus, flowing from the territory of the Potivani. A portion of them also forms the adjoining port of Brundulum, in the same manner as Adron is formed by the two rivers Meduacus and the Clodian Canal. With the waters of these streams the Padus unites, and with them discharges itself into the sea, forming, according to most writers, between the Alps and the seashore, a triangular figure, 2,000 stadia in circumference, not unlike the delta formed by the Nile in Egypt. I feel somewhat ashamed to have to borrow from the Greeks any statement in reference to Italy. Metrodorus of Skopsos, however, informs us that this river has obtained its name of Padus from the fact that about its source there are great numbers of pine trees, which in the Gallic language are called Padi. In the tongue of the Ligurians this river is called the Bonicus, which signifies the bottomless. This derivation is in some measure supported by the fact that near this river there is the town of Industria, of which the ancient name was Bodinconegum, and where the river begins to be of greater depth than in other parts. Chapter 21. The 11th region of Italy, Italia Transpadana. From the river Padus, the 11th region receives its name of Transpadana, to which, situate as it is wholly in the interior, the river, with its bounteous channel, conveys the gifts of all the seas. The towns are Vibiforum and Segusio, and at the foot of the Alps the colony of Augusta Taurinorum, at which place the Padus becomes navigable, and which was founded by the ancient race of the Ligurians, and of Augusta Praetoria of the Selasi, near the two passes of the Alps. The Grecian and the Pennine, by the latter it is said that the Carthaginians passed into Italy, and by the Grecian, Hercules. The town of Aporida, the foundation of which by the Roman people was enjoined by the Sibylline books, the Gauls call tamer of horses by the names of Opodori. The Vercellae, the town of the Libyci, derived its origin from the Saluvi, and Novaria, founded by the Verticomacori, is at the present day a district of the Volcontii, and not, as Cato supposes, of the Ligurians, of whom two nations, called the Livii and the Marici, founded Ticinum, not far from the Padus, as the Boii, descended from the Transalpine nations, have founded Laus Pompeia and the Insurbes Mediolanum. From Cato we learn that Comum, Bergamum, and Liciniforum, and some other peoples of the vicinity, originated from the Orobii, but he admits that he is ignorant as to the origin of that nation. Cornelius Alexander, however, informs us that they came from Greece, interpreting their name as meaning those who live upon the mountains. In this district Para has disappeared, a town of the Orobii, from whom, according to Cato, the people of Bergamum are descended. Its site even yet shows that it was situate in a position more elevated than fruitful. The Caturiges have also perished, an exiled race of the Insubres, as also Spina previously mentioned. Melpum, too, a place distinguished for its opulence, which, as we are informed by Cornelius Nepos, was destroyed by the Insubres, the Boii, and the Senones, on the very day on which Camillus took Veii. Chapter 22. The 10th region of Italy. We now come to the 10th region of Italy, situate on the Adriatic Sea. In this district are Venetia, the river Silus, arising in the Tarvasanian mountains, the town of Altinum, the river Lequentia, rising in the mountains of Opitigium, and a port with the same name, the colony of Concordia, the rivers and harbors of Romatinum, the greater and lesser Tiliaventum, the Anaxum, into which the Veramus flows, the Ausa, and the Nazio, with the Taurus, which flows past the colony of Aquileia, at a distance of 15 miles from the sea. This is the country of the Carni, and adjoining to it that of the Eapades, the river Timavus, the fortress of Pucinum, famous for its wines, the Gulf of Tergeste, and the colony of that name, 33 miles from Aquileia. 6 miles beyond that place lies the river Formio, 189 miles distant from Ravenna, the ancient boundary of enlarged Italy, and now the frontier of Istria. That this region takes its name from the river Ister, which flows from the Danube, also called the Ister, into the Adriatic opposite the mouth of the Padus, and that the sea which lies between them is rendered fresh by their waters running from opposite directions, has been erroneously asserted by many, and among them by Nepos even, who dwelt upon the banks of the Padus. For it is a fact that no river which runs from the Danube discharges itself from the Adriatic. They have been misled, I think, by the circumstances that the ship Argo came down some river into the Adriatic Sea, not far from Tergeste, but what river that was is now unknown. The most careful writers say that the ship was carried across the Alps on men's shoulders, having passed along the Ister, then along the Savus, and so from Nauportus, which place, lying between Imola and the Alps, from that circumstance derives its name. End of section 21.
Section 22 of the Natural History, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joyce Martin. The Natural History, Volume 1, by Pliny the Elder, translated by John Bostock and Henry Thomas Riley. Section 22, Book 3, Chapters 23 to 30, and Summary. Chapter 23, 19. Istria, its people and locality. Istria projects in the form of a peninsula. Some writers have stated its length to be 40 miles and its circumference 125, and the same as to Liburnia, which adjoins it, and the Flenatic Gulf, while others make it at 225, others again make the circumference of Liburnia 180 miles. Some persons, too, extend Ispadia at the bank of Istria as far as the Flenatic Gulf, a distance of 130 miles, thus making Liburnia but 150 miles. Tuditanus, who subdued the Istri, had this inscription on his statue which was erected there: From Aquileia to the river Titus is a distance of 1,000 stadia. The towns of Istria, with the rights of Roman citizens, are Egida, Parentium, and the colony of Pulla, and now Paetus Julia, formerly founded by the Colchians, and distant from Tergeste 100 miles, after which we come to the town of Nisactium, and the river Arsia, now the boundary of Italy. The distance across from Ancona to Pola is 120 miles. In the interior of the 10th region are the colonies of Ceramona, Bryaxia, and the territory of the Cenomani. a teste belonging to the Veneti, and the towns of Aquilum, Patavium, Opiturgium, Bellunum, and Viceccia, with Mantua the only city of the Tuscans now left beyond the Pades. Cato informs us that the Veneti are descendants of the Trojans, and that the Cenomani dwelt among the Volcae in the vicinity of Massilia. There are also the towns of the Fertini, the Tridentini, and the Berucinans belonging to the Reti, Verona belonging to the Reti and the Egani, and the Julienses to the Carni. We then have the following peoples whom there is no necessity to particularize with any degree of exactness: the Alutrenses, the Asriates, the Flamonenses, with those surnamed Vanienses, and the others called Culisi, the Furo Julienses, surnamed Transpandi, the Furtani, the Nediantes, the Quarquini, the Tarusiani, the Togienses, and the Varvi. In this district there have disappeared upon the coast Arameni, Palosum, and the Palatium, Itina and Cailina belonging to the Veneti, Segeste and Ocra to the Carini, and Noria to the Turisi. El Piso also informs us that although the Senate disapproved of his so doing, M. Claudius Marcellius razed to the ground a tower statue at the 12th milestone from Aquileia. In this region also, and the 11th, there are some celebrated lakes, and several rivers that either take their rise in them or else are fed by their waters, in those cases in which they again emerge from them. These are the Adua, fed by the lake Larius, the Tycanius by Lake Verbenus, the Minicris by Lake Benacus, the Oleus by Lake Sabinus, and the Lambrus by Lake Eupilus, all of them flowing into the Padus. Caylus states that the length of the Alps from the upper sea to the lower is 1,000 miles, a distance which Timagenes shortens by 22. Cornelius Nepos assigns to them a breadth of 100 miles, and T. Livis of 3,000 stadia, but then in different places. For in some localities they exceed 100 miles, where they divide Germany, for instance, from Italy, while in other parts they do not reach 70, being thus narrowed by the providential dispensation of nature, as it were. The breadth of Italy, taken from the river Var at the foot of these mountains, and passing along by the Vada Stabadia, the Tarini, the Comum, Brixia, Verona, Vicentia, Optigurium, Aquitilla, Tergeste, Pola, and Arsina, is 745 miles. Chapter 24. The Alps and the Alpine Nations. Many nations dwell among the Alps, but the more remarkable between Pola and the district of Tergeste are the Secuseses, the Sobrocrini, the Catali, the Menocalini, and near the Carne the people formerly called the Taroisci, but now the Norici. Adjoining to these are the Reti and the Vedelici, who are all divided into a multitude of states. It is supposed that the Reti are the descendants of the Tuscans, who were expelled by the Gauls and migrated hither under the command of their chief, whose name was Rhaetus. Turning them to the side of the Alps which fronts Italy, we have the Eugenian nations enjoying Latin rights, and of whom Cato enumerates 34 towns. Among these are the Triumplini, a people who were sold with their territory, and then the Camuni and several similar tribes, each of them in the jurisdiction of its neighboring municipal town. The same author also considers the Lepontini and the Salsi to be of Taurisian origin, but most other writers, giving a Greek interpretation to their name, consider the Lepontini to have been those of the followers of Hercules, who were left behind in consequence of their limbs being frozen by the snow of the Alps. They are also of opinion that the inhabitants of the Grecian Alps are descended from a portion of the Greeks of his army, and that the Euganeans, being sprung from an origin so illustrious, thence took their name. The head of these are the Stioni, the Venetians, and the Sarantes, and peoples of the Reti dwell about the sources of the river Rennes, while the tribe of Leponti, known as the Uberi, dwell in the vicinity of the sources of the Rodanes, in the same district of the Alps. There are also other native tribes here who have received Latin rights, such as the Octoduranenses and their neighbors, the Centrones, the Coetian states, the Ligurian Vaginetti, descended from the Cateriges, as also those called Montani, besides numerous nations of the Capillati in the confines of Ligurian Sea. It may not be inappropriate in this place to subjoin the inscription now to be seen upon the trophy erected in the Alps, which is to the following effect: To the Emperor Caesar, the son of Caesar now deified, Augustus Pontifex Maximus, an emperor 14 years, in the 17th year of his holding the tribunal authority, the Senate, and the Roman people, in remembrance that under his command and auspices all the Alpine nations which extended from the upper sea to the lower were reduced to subjection by the Roman people. The Alpine nations so subdued were the Triumplini, the Camoni, the Venastes, and the Venoeses, the Isarci, the Bruni, the Genoese, the Phocantes, 4 nations of the Vindelici, the Consantes, the Rusiantes, the Lycates, the Catantes, the Ambisontes, the Rugusci, the Sunetes, the Calucones, the Brixentes, the Leponti, the Uberi, the Nantustes, the Seduni, the Varagi, the Salasi, the Octavones, the Medullae, the Uxini, the Caturgis, the Brigiani, the Sugianti, the Brodianti, the Nemilani, the Andantes, the Euspiani, the Viamini, the Galatae, the Triulatae, the Ecdini, the Virgunini, the Aegutituri, the Nemisturi, the Aratelli, the Nerusi, the Valuni, and the Suetri. The 12 states of the Cotiani were not included in the list, as they had shown no hostility, nor yet those which had been placed by the Pompeian law under the jurisdiction of the municipal towns. Such, then, is Italy, sacred to the gods. Such are the nations, such the cities of her peoples, to which we may add that this is that same Italy which, when Alemanius Paulus and C. Attilas Regalis were consuls, on hearing of the rising in Gaul unaided and without any foreign assistance whatever, without the help even of that portion which lies beyond the Pontus, armed 80,000 horse and 700,000 foot. In abundance of metals of every kind, Italy yields to no land whatever, but all search for them has been prohibited by an ancient decree of the Senate, who gave orders thereby that Italy should be exempted from such treatment. Chapter 25. Liburnia and Illyricum. The nation of the Liburnia joins the river Arcia, and extends as far as the river Titus. The Mentores, the Hymani, the Enchalai, the Buni, and the people from Callimachus, called the Pacitai, formerly formed part of it, but now the whole in general are comprised under the one name of Illyricum. But few of the names of these nations are worthy of mention, or indeed very easy of pronunciation. To the jurisdiction of Sardinia resort the Elapides and 14 cities of the Liburni, of which it may not prove tedious if I mention the Lachienses, the Stulipini, the Bernistae, the Alboneses. Belonging to the same jurisdiction there are, in the enjoyment of Italian rights, the Alute, the Filantes, and from whom the Gulf takes its name, the Lopsi, and the Varvarini, the Ascentes, who are exempt from tribute, and upon the islands the Furtinates and the Coricti. Besides these, there are on the coast, after leaving Nassatium Avona, Falanona, Tarsicia, Senia, Lopsia, Ortopula, Vegium, Agrantium, Corinthium, Aeonia, the city of Pasinium, and the river Tadanius, at which Iapedia terminates. The islands of this gulf, with their towns, besides those above mentioned, are Absirtium, Arba, Craxa, Gison, and Portunata. Again, on the mainland there is the colony of Istera, distant from Pola 160 miles, Then at a distance of 30 miles, the island of Colentum, and of 18, the mouth of the river Titus. Chapter 26. Dalmatia. Sardona, situate upon the river at a distance of 12 miles from the sea, forms the boundary of Liburnia and the beginning of Dalmatia. Next to this place comes the ancient country of the Altaraertes and the fortress of Tariona, the promontory of Diomedes, or, as others call it, the peninsula of Helios, 100 miles in circuit. Then comes Trigernia, a place with the rights of Roman citizens, and celebrated for its marble. Secum, a place to which Claudius, the emperor lately deified, sent a colony of his veterans, and Salona, a colony situate 112 miles from the Iadera. To this place resort for legal purposes, having the laws dispensed according to their divisions into decuries or tithings, the Dalmate forming 342 decuries, the Decuri 22, the Ditones 239, the Mazae 269, and the Sardiates 52. In this region are Burnum, Auditrium, and Tribulium, fortresses ennobled by the battles of the Roman people. To the same jurisdiction also belong the Issei, the Colenti, the Sipari, and the Eptini, nations inhabiting the islands. After these come the fortresses of Pagentium and of Rutanium, and the colony of Nerona, the seat of the third jurisdiction, distant from Salona 82 miles, and situate upon a river of the same name, at a distance of 20 miles from the sea. And Vera states that 89 states used to resort thither, but now nearly the only ones that are known are the Seruni with 24 decuries, and Doriazi with 17, the Distates with 103, the Decolate with 33, the Deratini with 14, the Deramiste with 30, the Dindari with 33, the Glindentones with 44, the Malcomani with 24, the Narisi with 102, the Scutari with 72, the Sicolate with 24, and the Vardae, once the scourges of Italy, with no more than 20 decuries. In addition to these, this district was possessed by the Osiri, the Partheni, the Hemacini, the Arthratai, and the Armistai. The colony of Epidaurus is distant from the river Naran 100 miles. After Epidaurus come the following towns with the rights of Roman citizens: Resinium, Acrubium, Buscia, Orsinulum, formerly called Colchinium, having been founded by the Colchians, the river Drilo, and upon it Soctra, in town with the rights of Roman citizens, situate at a distance of 18 miles from the sea. Besides, in former times, many Greek towns and once powerful states, of which all remembrance is fast fading away. For in this region there were formerly the Lebanti, the Enderini, the Sassai, the Gaberni, properly called Illyri, the Talitanti, and the Pyri. The promontory of Nifilium on the seacoast still retains its name, and there is Lycium, a town enjoying the rights of Roman citizens, at a distance from Epidaurus of 100 miles. At Lycium begins the province of Macedonia, the nations of the Partheni, and behind them the Desarte. The mountains of Candavia are 78 miles from Dyrrhachium. On the coast lies Denda, a town with the rights of Roman citizens. The colony of Epidamnum, which on account of its inauspicious name was by the Romans called Dyrrhachium, the river Aos, by some called Ais, and Apollonia, formerly a colony of the Corinthians, at a distance of 4 miles from the sea, in the vicinity of which the celebrated Nymphium is inhabited by the barbarous Amantes and Bulliones. Upon the coast, too, is the town of Orium, founded by the Colchians. At this spot begins Epirus, with the Acrononian mountains, by which we have previously mentioned this Gulf of Europe as bounded. Auricum is distant from the promontory of Salentium in Italy, 80 miles. Chapter 27. The Norisi. In the rear of the Carni and the Iapetes, along the course of the great river Ister, the Rhaetai touch upon the Norici. Their towns are Verunum, Celia, Turnia, Augutium, Bianiamina, Claudia, and Flavium Solvense. Adjoining to the Noriki is Lake Paizo and the deserts of the Boli. They are, however, now inhabited by the people of Sarbia, a colony of the now deified Emperor Claudius, and the town of Scarabantia Julia. Chapter 28. Panoia. Next to them comes acorn-bearing Panoia, along which the chain of the Alps, gradually lessening as it runs through the middle of Illyricum from north to south, forms a gentle slope to the right hand and to the left. The portion which looks toward the Adriatic Sea is called Dalmatia and Illyricum, above named, while Pannonia stretches away toward the north, and has the Danube for its extreme boundary. In it are the colonies of Emona and Siska. The following rivers, both known to fame and adapted for commerce, flow into the Danube: the Dreyus, which rushes from Noricum with great impetuosity, and the Savus, which flows from a mere gentle current from the Carnic Alps, there being a space between them of 120 miles. The Dreyus runs through the Sorrentes, the Serapilli, the Iasi, and the Asiantes; the Savus through the Colpiani, the Beruzzi, and these are the principal peoples. Besides them there are the Arivates, the Azalis, the Amantini, the Belgites, and the Catari, the Cornates, the Aravici, the Herculantes, the Latovi, the Osirates, the Varcunani, and in front of Mount Claudius the Scordisci, behind it the Turrisi. In the Savus there is the island of Metabaris, the greatest of all the islands formed by rivers. Besides the above, there are these other rivers worthy of mention: the Colapis, which flows into the Savus near Siscia, where, dividing its channel, it forms the island which is called Sagentia, and the river Bactanius, which flows into the Savus at the town of Sirmium, where we find the state of Sirmiensis and the Amanti. 45 miles thence is Tarunum, where the Savus flows into the Danube, above which spot the Valanus and the Europanus, themselves far from ignoble rivers, join that stream. Chapter 29. Moesia. Joining up to Pannonia is the province called Moesia, which runs with the course of the Danube as far as the Euxine. It commences at the confluence previously mentioned. In it are the Dardani, the Silageri, the Tribali, the Timanchi, the Moesi, the Thracians, and the Scythians who border on the Euxine. The more famous among its rivers are the Margis, which rises in the territory of Dardani, the Plingus, the Timachus, the Isis, which rises in Mount Rhodope, and rising in Mount Haemus, the Utus, the Asimus, and the Aeterus. The breadth of Illyricum at its widest part is 325 miles, and its length from the river Arsia to the river Dronilius 530. From the Dronilius to the promontory of Acroneia, Agrippa states to be 175 miles, and he says that the entire circuit of the Italian and Illyrian Gulf is 1,700 miles. In this gulf, according to the limits which we have drawn, are two seas, the Ionian in the first part, and the Adriatic, which runs more inland and is called the Upper Sea. Chapter 30. Islands of the Ionian Sea and the Adriatic. In the Ausonian Sea there are no islands worthy of notice beyond those which we have already mentioned, and only a few in the Ionian, those, for instance, upon the Calabrian coast, opposite Brundisium, by the projection of which a harbor is formed, and over against the Apulian coast, Diomedia, remarkable for the monument of Diomedes; the other island called by the same name, but by some Teutria. The coast of Illyricum is clustered with more than 1,000 islands, the sea being of a shoaly nature, and numerous creeks and estuaries running with their narrow channels between portions of the land. The more famous are those before the mouths of the Timavus, which form springs that rise with the tides of the sea. The island of Sisa, near the territory of the Istri and the Polaria, and the Abstirides, also called by the Greeks from the circumference of Absteris, the brother of Media, having been slain there. Some islands near them have been called the Electrides, upon which amber, which they called Electrum, was said to be found. A most assured instance, however, of that untruthfulness which is generally ascribed to the Greeks, seeing that has never yet been ascertained which of the islands were meant by them under that name. Opposite to the Iader is Lissa and other islands whose names have been already mentioned. Opposite to the Liburni are some islands called the Cretae, and no smaller number styled Liburni, and no smaller number styled Liburnicae and Caludesi. Opposite to Cirium is Bavo and Bratia, famous for its goats, Issa with the rights of Roman citizens, and Faria with a town. At a distance of 25 miles from Issa is Corcraia, surnamed Malena, with a town founded by the Scythians, between which and Alicrium is Malite, from which, as we learn from Callimachus, a certain kind of little dogs were called Malitae. 15 miles from it we find the 7 Elaphites. In the Ionian Sea, at a distance of 12 miles from Auricum, is Sassones, notorious from having been a harbor of pirates. Summary. The towns and nations mentioned are in number. The rivers of note are in number. The mountains of note are in number. The islands are in number. The towns or nations which have disappeared are in number. The facts, statements, and observations are in number 326. Roman authors quoted: Tyrrhenius Gracillus, Cornelius Nepos, T. Livius, Cato the Censor, Agrippa, and Varro, the Emperor Augustus now deified, Varro Actantius, Antius, Hyginus, Helvitus, Pomponius Mela, Curia the Elder, Caelius, Aruntus, Sabosus, Licinius, Massianus, Fabricius Tuscus, L. Atenius Capito, Varius Flaccus, L. Piso, Gallianus, and Valerianus. Foreign authors quoted: Artemidorus, Alexander, Polyhistor, Theoclides, Theophrastus, Isidorus, Theopompus, Metrodorus of Cyprus, Calicantres, Xenophon of Elampscus, Diodorus of Syracuse, Nymphodorus, Seliphanes, and Timagenes. End of section 22. Recorded by J. Martin.